My dear young friends, I am happy and proud to welcome you to our 10th season of Young People's Concerts. And to add to the festivities, this is also the first season in which all our programs will be seen on television in color, which is why I've got this modishly colorful tie on. And that brings us to our subject. What is a mode? Well, for one thing, musical modes have nothing to do with neckties or dresses or even with fashions of a musical kind. Modes are simply scales, though not perhaps those very scales you practice on your piano. They're rather special scales, and I wouldn't have dreamed of bothering you with them except for an incident that happened a few months ago. My 14-year-old daughter, Jamie, happened to ask me one day why a certain Beatles song had such funny harmony. She couldn't seem to find the right chords for it on her guitar. And I began to explain to her that the song was modal. That is, it was based on what is called a mode. And I went on to show her the chords that came from that mode, and she got so excited she wanted to know more and more about it, till finally she said, well, why not tell all this on a young people's program? Nobody ever heard of modes. Well, I thought Jamie is just a natural music lover with the usual weekly piano lesson, and if she finds this material fascinating, why shouldn't you? So here goes, and you can blame it all on Jamie. Okay, we already know that a mode is a scale. But first of all, what is a scale? I'm sure you know, but maybe you've never tried to put it into words. Well, a scale is simply a way of dividing up the distance between any note and the same note repeated an octave higher. Now, the most famous and often used division of this octave range in our Western music is what we call the major scale. I guess you all know that one. And the other famous one is the minor scale. I guess you know that too. Now, what's the difference between the major and the minor? Many people think the only difference is that major scales sound happy and minor ones sound sad. Well, that's sometimes true, but not always. The real difference is in the arrangement of the intervals. The smallest interval, that is the distance from any note to its nearest neighbor, is called a half tone. So from C to C sharp is a step of a half tone. And from C sharp to D is again a half tone. So it would stand to reason that from C straight to D is a whole tone, since two halves make a whole. Get it? Fine. Okay. Now this entire C major scale is nothing but a series of whole tones and half tones arranged in a special order. First, two whole tones, 1, 2, then a half tone, then three whole tones, and then a half tone. That's a major scale. And the minor scale is almost the same arrangement of intervals, the main difference being in the third note of the scale, which in the minor is a half tone lower, so that the minor scale sounds like this. And it doesn't matter whether you start on C or on E flat or on Q sharp. You can always get a major or a minor scale by following the proper arrangement of intervals. For instance, here's a major scale beginning on F sharp. And that's called F sharp major. Here's F sharp minor. And here's a major scale beginning on B flat. That's called B flat major. And here's B flat minor. And so it goes. But the important thing to remember is that those two kinds of scales, major and minor, are modes. Major mode and minor mode. Two modes out of a much larger number of possible ones. Now, before I tell you anything else about modes, we're going to play you a short but marvelous piece by the great French composer Debussy. This piece is completely based on modes that are neither major nor minor. This brilliant piece, which is called Festivals, or in French, Fête, uses all kinds of other modes, which, of course, you won't know about yet. You'll just be hearing beautiful sounds that will seem a bit strange and ear-tickling. But we're going to play it again later at the end of this program, and I'm sure that by then you'll be able to recognize most of the peculiar things that are going on. So for the moment, just enjoy it and imagine a splendid nighttime celebration with many colored lights and lanterns everywhere, gorgeous fireworks in the sky, and everyone dancing in costumes of long ago. And suddenly, in the middle of the piece, the dance music breaks off, and we faintly hear a procession in the far distance. And this march-like music comes nearer and nearer, and when it finally arrives in all its glory, the dance music and the march music are heard together in an exciting blend of tumultuous sounds. And finally, at the end of the piece, it grows late, the crowds thin out, as does the music, and it all ends in a whisper with an echo or two of the night's festivities hanging in the air. Here is Debussy's Fête. How about that for an exciting piece? I find it positively goose-fleshy. And a lot of the excitement in it comes from the fact that it uses those strange scales or modes which are neither major nor minor. For instance, right at the beginning appears that swirling dance tune, which sounds at first as though it's in the usual minor mode. In fact, the first 5 notes of it are exactly the first 5 notes of the minor scale. But then comes the twist. These notes don't belong to any minor scale that we know. Then what scale is this? Answer, it's the scale of the Dorian mode. Now, don't let that throw you. Keep calm, sit back, and let's quietly find out just what this Dorian mode is and why it sounds so special. The word Dorian obviously comes from the Greek, and in fact, as well as all the other modes we're about to discover, does come originally from the music of ancient Greece. We don't know too much about that old Greek music. What we do know is that the Greek modes eventually made their way to Rome and were taken up by the Roman Catholic Church during the Middle Ages in a somewhat different form. But the Church kept the old Greek names for the modes: Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and Ionian. Now, there's a mouthful for you, I know, but they're much easier to understand than their names are to pronounce. And they are still used today in Catholic churches all over the world in those beautiful chants called plain song. Here's a tiny example of plain song in the Dorian mode. Isn't that beautiful? And I bet you didn't know they could sing too, did you? You've just witnessed the debut of a great new glee club. Anyway, that music is in the Dorian mode and uses exactly the same scale, the same arrangement of intervals as Debussy used in his Fête. But what is this scale? Well, that's easy. To find the Dorian mode on your piano, all you have to do is start on the note D and play only white notes all the way up to the next D. And you've got it. Simple. And that's true of all the other church modes as well, by the way. They're all to be found by starting on a given white note and making a scale up using white notes only. Isn't that lucky? And we're particularly lucky with the Dorian mode because it starts on D, and D is the first letter of the word Dorian. So you have no excuse for forgetting how to find this mode on your piano. Dorian, capital D, note D, white notes all the way up, and voila. Now, here's another piece in the Dorian mode. I wonder if you know this one. Every time I think that I'm the only one who's lonely, someone calls on me. And every now and then I spend my time with rhyme and verse and curse the fault in me. And then along comes Mary. Along comes Mary in the ancient and honorable Dorian mode. The same mode we just heard in Debussy and in the plain chant. Now, who'd have thunk it? What is that old Greek mode doing in today's pop music? Well, I'll tell you. From about the time of Bach until the beginning of our own century, roughly 200 years, our Western music has been based almost exclusively on only 2 modes, the major and the minor. Now, I can't go into the whys and wherefores of it now, but it's true. And since most of the music we hear in concerts today was written during that 200-year period, we get to think that major and minor modes are all there are. But the history of music is much longer than a mere 200 years. There was an awful lot of music sung and played before Bach, using all kinds of other modes. And in the music of our own century, when composers have gotten tired of being stuck with major and minor all the time, there's been a big revival of those old pre-Bach modes. And that's why Debussy used them so much, and other modern composers like Hindemith and Stravinsky and almost all the young songwriters of today's exciting pop music scene. The modes have provided them with a fresh sound, a relief from the old overused major and minor. For instance, if that swinging opening of Along Comes Mary had been written in the usual everyday minor mode, it would sound like this. Sort of square, isn't it? Ordinary. But this has a kick in it, and that kick is Dorian. You can see that this Dorian mode is almost like an ordinary minor mode, but not quite. And that not quite is what makes the difference. And that difference gives the music a certain ancient, primitive, oriental feeling. So ancient as to seem timeless. And that's why the tune in Debussy's Fête seems so exotic and of another age. And that's why Along Comes Mary sounds so primitive and earthy. Now, by way of contrast, listen to this opening section of Sibelius' Sixth Symphony, which is also in the Dorian mode, and see if you can feel again that same timeless, brooding, ancient, far-off quality, only this time coming from the remote, lonely forests of Finland. You see what I mean by the special feeling of the Dorian mode? Are you beginning to get the sound of it in your ears? Well, let's get technical just for a minute and find out exactly what it is that gives us this feeling. As we know, this Dorian mode is practically like the usual minor mode, with one very big difference. In the minor mode, the seventh note is called the leading tone because it leads us home to the keynote or tonic, which is D. And that leading tone leads us to the tonic by the smallest possible interval, namely a half tone. You see? Amen. It's as though that leading tone were in love with the tonic and were pulled toward it, wants to embrace it, it wants to get there. And it does. But in the Dorian mode, where the seventh note is a half tone lower, there's a full whole step between it and the tonic. So it just doesn't seem to lead as strongly. It's not in love with the tonic. It's friendly enough, but it just wants to shake hands. You feel how formal, how strange and modal that sounds, that amen? The minute we hear that amen, we feel behind it the weight of many centuries, of a different, older, more Eastern culture. Bach never wrote an amen like that, and neither did Beethoven or Brahms. But in our own century, it gets written all the time. For example, this. Secret aged man, secret aged man. Well, that's no amen, of course. But musically, it's exactly the same idea. You see? Well, that's an awful lot about the Dorian mode, which, may you never forget, as long as you live, starts on D. Right.